Good afternoon, everyone. We are going to start in about 5 minutes. We just wanted to make sure everybody could get in from the lobby. So just give us 5 minutes and we'll be right with you. Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us for this afternoon's Comprehensive Literacy webinar series. I'm Jill Nogueras, the K-12 English Coordinator here at the Virginia Department of Education. And this afternoon, we are teaming up in collaboration with our friends in the Assessment Office to share with you some results of the school interviews that we held this fall. And I would, at this point, like to introduce Catherine Ringley, who will be sharing some findings with you this afternoon. So I will let her take it from here. Thank you, Catherine.
Thank you. We're really excited to be sharing this information with you today. First, if you have questions during the webinar, you're able to use the chat feature. Send your questions to host, and we will try to stop periodically if we get some questions and try to answer those. So we want to start today by talking about the purpose of conducting these interviews and of this webinar. We wanted to gather some information to assist schools across Virginia to increase their student literacy. So in doing that, we selected some schools to interview to talk about their best practices that they were using in their schools. School personnel shared practices and processes that they believe contributed to the students' success and resulted in that improvement of student literacy. So how we've presented this information today is not so much what we think, but it's more what we have heard. This is information from school staff, people in the field, and what they've been doing. So everything is kind of framed as participants share this information, not that VDOE says this is the way to go, but keeping in mind that the fact that we interviewed these schools, because of their increase in their reading scores, probably what they're doing is working. So how we selected schools for the interviews, we looked at those schools who demonstrated a continuous increase in reading SOL test scores. We wanted to learn what they were doing during their literacy instruction. We tried to look at the good regional representation, include the locality type. If everyone minute to mute all of your devices. We're getting a little bit of feedback here. So you may be listening to this webinar and thinking, well, we had a continuous increase in our reading SOL test scores. We weren't selected to interview, and we just wanted to be clear that we chose a sampling of schools. It's very possible that your school also showed the same kind of growth, and we would always be interested to hear what you've been doing as well. But we took a sampling of schools that represent the superintendent's regions and locality types when possible. One thing we wanted to make sure to be clear about is that this information is really important because it is information that comes directly from the school division, directly from teachers and other educators. What they're sharing is authentic to what's going on in Virginia classrooms. And they have shared with us the practices that they adopted and monitored with positive results for student learning. We wanted to give you some ideas today that you might be able to use in your own classrooms while you're working to improve literacy. So today, as an overview of the information that we learned, we organized it into a few categories, and you may see throughout the webinar that the information can be categorized in one or more of these areas. We found that school participants mentioned the alignment of their curriculum and instruction, their focus on literacy, their strategic use of data and assessment, their setting goals and monitoring progress, their supportive leadership, and their targeted professional development as things that have contributed to their increase in reading SOL scores and improvement in their literacy instruction overall. So the first focus we wanted to talk about was the alignment of curriculum and instruction. Participants reported exposing all students to texts that were on grade level rather than a student's measured reading level. That doesn't mean all the time. That doesn't mean they were only giving students texts that were on grade level. We would not suggest that you stop scaffolding students' reading, but it's important that all of the students are exposed to grade level texts. One reason from an assessment point of view is that the SOL passages on an SOL reading test don't adjust in terms of difficulty. It's only the item sets that adjust. So a fourth grader taking a fourth grade test is receiving a fourth grade passage. Their item sets may be more or less difficult depending on their achievement on the previous item sets, but they will be exposed to a grade level text while taking that SOL test. So it's important to keep that in mind. Participants reported intentionally exposing students to high quality, relevant texts. And if you've been participating in the other webinars in this comprehensive literacy webinar series, you'll see this pop up over and over again. We really want students to be looking at high quality, relevant texts. And we've heard from the field that this is what people are doing, and it's made an improvement. In daily life, people are exposed to a wide variety of texts, and you read it for a variety of purposes. So people think about what you're reading and why you're doing that. Drill the skill is not authentic to real reading. So it makes sense that reading high quality, relevant texts in class is going to help students improve with their literacy. Students are learning from real published authors. Participants reported that. And to clarify, real published authors, we know that there's an author in your workbook or your practice worksheet. Someone was the author of that, but we mean these authors who they've written pieces for a different purpose and a different audience. The workbooks are published for a very specific reason, and then our real authentic texts are published for different reasons. So it's hard to get to an extended, complicated theme in a 6-paragraph story. It can be done, but it would be very, very challenging. So we want to look at extended texts, lengthy texts for students to be reading. This is important to reading comprehension and also to the teaching of writing to show students real published authors and what they're doing. Participants reported the need to get books in the hands of kids. So they really wanted students to choose what they read for independent reading time and ignoring those measured reading levels. Again, I don't think we're advocating for you to never measure students' reading levels or ignore them completely, but these participants reported to us that they allowed students to choose their books based on their interests, based on appropriate content, and not so much the exact reading level that was in their range. If you think about going to the library to get a book to read it for the, your vacation, and the librarian said to you, you have to put that back. You can only get the books with the red sticker. You wouldn't like that very much. And so these participants reported that that has gone a long way with their students and allowing them to exercise their choice. And then if the student came back and said, this book was too hard for me, that was an opportunity for these participants to discuss with those students what they thought they needed to work on to develop their comprehension so they might read that book again and have a better understanding this next time. Participants told us that they taught reading in a way that students could apply it to the real world as they encounter all types of texts. and thinking about reading as a metacognitive process and not a list of strategies and skills. We have to remember that our reading standards, we have the strands, and the strands are all in the context of comprehension. So we want students to be able to tell a cause and effect, but that's within the context of comprehending a grade level text that they've read. So we want teachers to think about reading as a metacognitive process, the way that these participants reported treating that content. The participants reported that they focused first on their classroom instruction, including relevant academic tasks, before worrying about their remediation programs. If you're focused mostly on your Tier 1 instruction, then you know that students are able to receive better, more high-quality classroom instruction when the focus is put there. Bring most of your kids up to Tier 1, and then you can focus on Tier 2 and Tier 3 remediation. We have a quote here we thought was really powerful. A participant stated that they tried a lot of different things with different remediation and different programs, but decided to just go back to good, strong teaching, and they would hit more kids that way. Some actual in-class strategies that were reported to us: guided reading. Teachers wanted to use guided reading in their class to improve literacy. We know that that is making the invisible visible by speaking aloud and having those conversations out loud that a strong reader has with themselves, but maybe a struggling reader needs to hear. There were also mention of shared reading and mentor texts. Shared reading, we know, begins the gradual release of responsibility. Students can experience these texts and experience them over again and learn new things from them, but also use them to model writing through our comprehensive literacy instruction that we're really hoping everyone is using. Participants reported having a full inclusion model and structuring their classrooms so that all students could have access to content, teachers, and grade level texts. So that includes your students with disabilities, your students receiving special education, English learners. They were all exposed to high quality relevant texts. They were all exposed to content, teachers, and they also had their classmates as resources. But keep in mind, any student in the 4th grade, any student in the 7th grade taking the 7th grade reading test will receive a grade level reading passage. So it's important to let those students have experience with those grade level texts. Participants reported to us using paired passages. They aligned their instruction with the 2017 English SOL. And as a reminder, students in grades 5 through end of course may receive a paired text, and it may be 2 texts of any genre. So they could have a short story and a poem. They could have an article and a recipe. They could have a poem and an article. It's any mixture of genres in those paired texts. One important thing that participants reported to us was the alignment. They felt that there was a big turnaround after understanding and then aligning their written, taught, and tested curriculum. This was an important focus in academic review, and these participants reported really understanding that alignment and seeing a difference when they aligned those 3 pieces of their curriculum. They use the academic review tools, which are linked in the PowerPoint, but these are available to anyone who would like to use them. You didn't have to participate in academic review, but if you did, you know them. But they are available if anyone is interested. And it was nice to hear that some participants found this to be a very important and relevant work for them to use in their classrooms. So another section of information that we gathered include the focus on literacy and comprehensive literacy instruction. Participants reported an integration of reading and writing strands and making time for writing instruction and then protecting that time. You can definitely make time for writing, but then things come up, you have to do this, that, and the other, and can push the writing lessons aside. But these participants reported that they protected that time set aside for writing so that they could have a comprehensive literacy instruction. Participants reported encouraging all teachers to be teachers of reading and writing, or to allow for practical, relevant reading and writing across content areas. So we always want to see that when possible. And they created a community of literacy. They incorporated independent reading time, talked about books, made opportunities for students to get excited about reading and writing, and a way for them to communicate in a variety of ways. And again, incorporating reading across the content areas. The next two slides you'll see we just wanted to pull from the comprehensive literacy best practices for elementary reading blocks. These are going to apply for middle and high school as well, but that's where we pulled them from, and they're just really relevant to this information today. So we need students to have opportunities to read daily. They need to read extended texts and grade level materials. So you'll see a lot of repetition. This is information, this best practice coming from our Office of Humanities here, and we see how it matches up and lines up with what participants reported to us through these school interviews. So I think that's really important and really telling on its own. We know that successful English instruction, again from the Comprehensive Literacy Series, involves reading, writing, research, and communication and multimodal literacies. We want to see all of those being taught together. Data and assessments were another important piece of information that we learned. Participants reported finding out that they were not looking at the right data. They were looking at SOL test data in the wrong way, or they were looking at classroom assessments that did not give them the data that they were looking for. And once teachers and administrators paired up to look closely at what data they were using and why, it really helped them to look at what they were doing and use their time wisely. For example, if you receive a student's SOL test results and they received one medium level item about conflict, which they then got incorrect, it should not mean that they need to drill only conflict for that student for an excessive period of time, because that one item may not have given them an accurate picture of what that student can do. So instead, the balance of less frequent summative data with the formative assessment data these people were collecting daily helped them to understand exactly where they needed to go to move students forward in their learning. We heard that participants were embedding formative assessment into all their lessons, and they were aligning learning goals with content and cognitive level of standards that included the behaviors, conditions, and success criteria that students needed to show to be successful. And we have a list of example formative assessments. They also reported requesting that students justify their answers during classroom assessments. We did have to write a note here. It would not be appropriate, cannot be required of students to do this during SOL testing. But if this is something that would be effective in classroom assessment, it seemed to work for these schools. Teachers would ask students follow-up questions to help them think about their answers, and it provided the teachers an opportunity to repair misunderstanding during formative assessment, because we know that's in the moment of classroom instruction. And it asked students to think about their thinking and then to communicate that. People use formative assessment data to provide specific, intentional feedback to students about their progress. So we know instead of good job, which could mean anything, teachers were able to tell students exactly what they did well and how they could use that to continue to move forward and where they're going next in their education. Participants spoke to us about using a variety of platforms and programs that house their summative classroom assessments and data, and that instant access to data they said was very helpful. This gave teachers more time to read and interpret their data to understand what it was suggesting about student performance. And they also reported doing their own error analysis on student benchmark, multiple choice responses. But what's important with this is if you're going to do an error analysis, those incorrect answers have to be rooted in misconceptions so that you know what a student has not understood. If there's no rhyme or reason to the constructing of incorrect responses, it may be more difficult to do that error analysis on the student response because you're not sure where the misunderstanding is there. We really enjoyed hearing this in our office, but test prep for these participants was limited. They resisted the urge, and it can be, I think, a tempting urge to give students reading passages with multiple choice or technology enhanced type items. It gives you that quick, immediate data about what you're looking for, conflict and resolution, cause and effect. But these participants resisted that urge and instead only gave students exposure to those passage and item type assessments as assessment and not as instruction, not using it during instruction time. And they limited test prep to the time period very close to the SOL test, and then it was only very targeted to give students an idea of what the format looked like using TestNav 8, talk about slash to the trash and 50-50 right there, right in front of the test, but not all year. Again, they reported using benchmarks as their opportunity to let students see what an SOL test environment would be like, to give students access to a fresh text where it's those passage and items that they haven't seen before, and to give them similar question stems to students. And example stems are available in some resources that are on our website if you're interested in that. That would be used during summative, the infrequent summative assessments and the period close to the SOL test. Participants also mentioned that setting goals and monitoring progress was important to them, and they thought that might have contributed to their success. Students set their own goals, and they used their own assessment and reading data to do so. Doing this helped with buy-in, and it encouraged students to be aware of their strengths and weaknesses. Teachers also set their own goals, and they reported using their experience with the Office of School Quality to reframe their thinking about their impact on student performance. They set their goals based on student data, and they made goals that were feasible but also ambitious. So if student test data comes back and the sixth grader scored 15%, we need something that's feasible. 85 is not feasible, but 20% is not ambitious enough to do the justice for those students and give them the education that they need and move them forward far enough. So teachers looked at the student data and made a goal that made sense based on that data, not based on the expectations of anything else. They reported reframing the role of the reading and curriculum specialist in their school division as someone to give peer feedback. They were a teacher coach or co-teacher within the classroom. They were non-evaluative, but instead they were there to help move the teachers forward in their teaching. And they created templates for teachers to conduct peer evaluations as part of their progress monitoring. So they were learning from each other, making the most of their human resources that they had in the building. Participants also reported that supportive leadership was very important to their success. This came in the form of division level administrators, for example, researching and making recommendations to the school board for needed human resources, school and division level administrators being intentional in the hiring of instructional coaches. They're working together to understand what their school and school division really needed, and then working together to make those changes happen. Another example of supportive leadership we heard was that the administration allowed staff to rework their pacing guide, which it may have taken a lot of time and energy to create, but then if it wasn't working, if students weren't learning the information and they needed to go back and rework that pacing guide, they were allowed to do so. They were granted time for collaboration, and then again, that time is protected by administrators, and that's a way of supporting them. Also, having a clearly defined purpose for staff meetings contributed to protecting staff time. So we're going to get together, we're going to talk about this, and when we leave, we'll know this information. And staff members felt like that really protected their time, and they could use the rest of their time to work on other things. Feedback for educators came in the form of immediate, targeted, quality, helpful feedback. It was specific to student learning and supportive, not punitive. So it didn't have a lot to do with what the classroom looked like, or the, how loud they were or what was on their desk, but more what was happening in the classroom, how it affected student learning in a way that was supportive. And administrators would also conduct informal walkthroughs to get a pulse of the building so that they could provide timely feedback and give teachers some feedback on these observations. Participants also reported creating a school improvement plan together, and that strong improvement plan may have helped contribute to their increase in their reading scores. They worked together to understand the school's true needs and plan for real sustainable changes. And again, they felt like working with the Office of School Quality Tools was helpful, and if anybody needs those tools, they are on our website. Participants reported that new initiatives were implemented to Fidelity with a long-term vision. And you see here we've linked the Virginia tiered system of supports, and also they reported using social emotional intervention to students who needed it because they weren't ready to start with their instructional intervention yet. They needed that social emotional intervention first, and then they could engage more successfully in learning opportunities. Participants reported reorganizing their staff at times in order to put teachers and other educators in the right places. For example, experienced special education co-teachers were in the classrooms, and teachers were teaching the grade level and the content that was their specialty, and rethinking the role of the literacy coach were all examples of that. Participants reported the importance of having trained and qualified reading tutors and specialists on their teams. This supports the thought that students receiving remediation or intervention would see more improvement if they worked with highly qualified and trained educators. So instead of having anyone work with the students on these worksheets or go over content with them again, these schools hired highly qualified, trained reading tutors and specialists to get those students in front of someone who had really strong content knowledge. And another instance of supportive leadership were those schools who prepared for teacher turnover, who placed systems and structures in place to prepare for this so that new teachers could embrace what had been built. It was easy for them to just move in and the entire staff to keep moving forward. And they also developed a strong peer mentoring program for new hires, which helped with this. Targeted professional development. Participants attributed some of their success to the development of professional learning communities and the availability of targeted professional development. They reported focus on vertical and horizontal collaboration to inform and improve curriculum and instruction decisions. And we know that vertical and horizontal collaboration is very important. We saw that participants were investing in learning. They reported that their school or division had taken steps to invest in learning not only for students but also for staff. So we see that they received targeted, appropriate professional development, and that they also created or embraced PLCs, made time for them to meet and protected that time. They felt that their strong PLCs assisted in creating a feeling of accomplishing their goals and a collective responsibility for teacher and student success. We talk about student success a lot, but they also attributed their strong PLCs to teacher success as well. They received help from their central office in order to do this. One thing that was reported to us is that instructional specialists and coaches received the professional development, and they used that to train and coach the teachers. Schools also looked at school-wide data and trends to determine the professional development needs by grade level and or school. So again, it was targeted. Time and support from administration for growth opportunities for staff members was also important. And our final thoughts here, what we heard a lot of really great things. But some of the most important were how these changes in the schools created a culture of change for the teachers. You can see some quotes that we heard about being together in their journey to educate the students and owning everything that was happening in their department. They reported to us that it restored a belief and sense of belonging in the student community. And that they reported that it was about getting the kids in front of us where they needed to be at the end of the year. We thought that was really important to share. We would like for you to stay connected with us. If you have any questions or concerns, we'd like to hear from you. And this is how you can reach the Office of Student Assessment and also the Department of Learning and Innovation.
Thank you, Catherine. This wraps up and concludes our webinar for this afternoon. We hope this has given you some information to take back to your divisions and share with your colleagues. Again, we look forward to opportunities to support you in the field and hope that you tune in. Both of these webinars will be repeated on Thursday, the one that we had this morning on reading in the middle for grades 6 through 8, and then this one will be repeated as well Thursday morning. So if you missed anything, you'll have another opportunity next week, and then we will get into 2 other additional topics in the following week. So thank you again for your time. We look forward to serving you out in the field as you move through the school year. Have a wonderful afternoon.